I'm Terry Waldo, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Jelly Roll Morton, the inventor of jazz. That was the Pearls. Jelly Roll Morton claimed that he invented jazz, and I think he's got a pretty good argument. He was the first guy to have jazz hits. He was the guy that brought jazz to Chicago, many other places in the country, which ultimately resulted in King Oliver and Louis Armstrong really setting the world on fire. And he was a genius. And he's really an underappreciated genius. He's the one we don't talk about too much. And most of the people that were in the jazz world after he sort of set it on fire didn't like him. The piece that I just played for you was called The Pearls, and that's one of his very inventive piano solos. He first started out in New Orleans, and he was playing in the red light district down there, which we called Storyville, which existed from about 1897 to 1917. And he was working in the houses of ill repute down there. and soaking up all the music that was around him, which included the classical music, all the pop tunes, everything that everybody wanted to hear down there, and of course the marching bands, which were playing in a different way than what we think of as ragtime, which was the popular music of the time. And Jelly Roll claimed that he took ragtime and invented a new style by playing it in a different way. That was, if you know ragtime, ragtime was basically a 2-beat feel, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and, with syncopation in the right hand, like that. But Jelly Roll Morton changed even the way he tapped his foot. He said, rather than tapping in 2, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and, he tapped his foot in 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the way the bands had been playing in New Orleans. So we think of that as being sort of an essential element of jazz. So you noticed in the piece I played the Pearls, a lot of it was in really 4-beat. But even when he was playing in 2 beats, he would put all of these things in that sort of imitated the bands and would change it to having a sort of a 4-beat feel. Like... Now you notice what I'm doing with the left hand here? I'm putting in an extra line. He's not just playing that boom chick feel or even a 4/4. Sometimes he's throwing in little things here which are really another line. And what he said he was doing was all the time when he was playing on piano, he was imitating the bands, all the parts. The trumpet playing the melody, the clarinet playing a harmony, and maybe a trombone playing this counter melody in the middle here, and the bass lines, all that sort of stuff. So Jelly Roll's playing reflected that, and in a way that maybe nobody else did at the time. So when you hear his tunes, he's got that going. He was the first guy to really write down the blues and to be playing in blues. His first composition was called the New Orleans Blues. Well, the thing you notice about that, it's got a habanera feel to it. He's not just playing blues like he's got he put that Spanish feel, and he said that he put that into everything that he played. You had to have some of a Spanish tinge, I believe is the term. But that was his first piece of music that he composed. It's an unusual piece. It's a habanera, but it's also a blues. So he also composed the first big jazz hits. You might recall King Porter's Stomp, which was a big hit for Benny Goodman. He had many hits like King Porter's Stomp that were popular on the radio. And the sad thing was his publisher, the Melrose Brothers, quit paying him any royalties on any of these big jazz hits. And they were making records and all over the radio. And then he could not get into ASCAP, which was paying obviously for the recorded performances and all of these radio things, because he was black. And they finally let him in, and for 10 years of performances that were broadcast, they paid him $200. So Jelly Roll Morton ends up literally starving to death in New York in the late 30s. He, fortunately for us, made a series of recordings, just solo piano, for the Library of Congress in 1938. And they are the greatest set of recordings that explain what happened in New Orleans, the inventions of jazz. There were things that nobody knew anything about, and they're quite poetic when you hear him talking. Even just the way he talks is musical. And he explained how he put together all of these things. He explained how he did the big band ideas of swing. That is, that he played what he called riffs. So if the sax section is playing this, that's a riff. And over top of that, there might be a soloist playing the melody on top of that. So that idea came from Jelly Roll Morton. The idea of breaks. If he's playing a piece of music, let's see. That's a break. And he'd have the whole band stop, and that became also essential for swing music. And as we explained before, the idea of swing, the way he conceived of it as having that 4-beat feel, and also not playing that straight up and down ragtime. If I was playing that same kind of a lick, if I was playing it in ragtime, I would have played. That's a ragtime feel, but if I'm playing it with a little bit of swing feeling, I'm going. Part of the problem with Jelly Roll's music, I think, was that nobody else could play it the way he could. When he made his recordings, and he made some magnificent recordings with a group he called the Red Hot Peppers, which was a bunch of musicians that were put together only for recording purposes, mostly in Chicago, although later in New York. But he made the best example of what we call New Orleans jazz, and that was his idea. But if he couldn't find guys from New Orleans to play, he really couldn't do it. And so the whole idea of what he was trying to do in all of his field, nobody and hardly anybody can play like Jelly Roll. That's even true today. To really get his style right and to play all of that is extremely difficult. So, I mean, it's no wonder that they sort of had a hard time with him. When he came to New York, he ran into the likes of guys like James P. Johnson and all of these wonderful players. The bands, you've got Fletcher Henderson and Duke Ellington doing the big band stuff. And so what he had come up with, everybody considered to be old-fashioned. He was also somewhat of a braggart. You know, he claimed he invented jazz and he claimed he gotten all this stuff started. Well, he really did. He really did, but nobody wanted to believe that. People like James P. Johnson, though, knew him and had seen Jelly Roll play as early as 1911 and knew that he was onto something and that he had provided something for our great heritage of jazz. So that's the story of Jelly Roll Morton.